They don't want to go to the adult shelter because, that 18 to 24-year-old, even though they're technically adults, legally, they want to feel safe. They want to have relationship with folks who really understand what young people are navigating.
Hi, folks. It's Alex with the Community Project, and this is State of the Street. I'm here with Annie from Together, and you guys are the youth service program in Boulder County and in Denver as well. You support individuals who maybe are coming out of the foster care system and or are just becoming homeless.
Yep. Yes. Youth and young adults experiencing homelessness. There is a high overlap with young people that have had experience in the child welfare, foster care system. In fact, that's one of the biggest windows of time that we see young people have their first experience of homelessness is when they're within the first 6 months of when they're exiting the foster care system. So not all young people experiencing homelessness have been in foster care, but about 40 to 50% of them have had some involvement with that system.
And when do you age out at foster care?
Well, it happens at different times for different young people. Some young people don't age out. They just opt out. So they might run away or leave a foster home or their current placement when they're 16, 17, 18. And that's when we will see young people unsheltered on the street. Some young people have a more formal process of actually aging out of the system and taking advantage of supports in that process. So in both of our permanent supportive housing projects for young people, we do have direct referrals that come from the county child welfare foster care system. So, there can be advantages to coordinating with your case manager, with the county to try to get that direct referral into a housing unit if you know that this young person is likely to experience homelessness when they exit.
So you try to catch them. They try to catch them before they hit the streets.
Yeah.
So.
And there are, benefits, financial benefits that youth in foster care have available to them. It's like any other public benefit system. It's extremely hard to navigate without support. So, young people might have access to tuition assistance or funding to pay their first month's rent and deposit because they're transitioning from the foster care system, but there's a lot of work and coordination and effort to really get access to those things. And so our case managers here do a lot of that work. Even youth that are in shelter, unhoused, that we know at one point were in foster care, trying to make sure we can track down the benefits that they're entitled to help with their transition.
That's a big job.
Yeah, big job. Mm-hmm.
How long has Together been?
This organization started in 1966. So next year will be our 60th.
And it started as Attention Homes. Is that correct?
Yeah, as Attention Homes.
1966.
Yep.
Wow,
yeah.
That's a long time.
Yeah, the world has changed a lot since then. We started, our founder was actually a judge here in Boulder County who was seeing young people who were involved in the criminal legal system. So he was seeing juveniles in his court that didn't necessarily belong in jail or need to go to jail, but there was nowhere else for them to be. And so the idea was created that young people need attention, not detention. And so Attention Homes was born, and it started with families just opening up their homes to youth in the community that were unhoused and needed that mentorship and support. And it's evolved over the years to become a homeless youth service provider.
That's a great start, though. That's a nice thing.
Yeah.
We need more of that these days, I think.
I think so. Yeah.
So you've been in the field, you said, for 20 years now, 21 years. Tell us a little bit about how you got your start.
I got my start just wanting to work in community. I had my fresh degree out of undergrad in social work, and I had really enjoyed getting to do internships and different things at the community level. I knew I wanted to work with young people. I was a young person at that time. And so I started working with an organization in Denver that had homeless youth service provision. And I started as a case manager working with young people who at that time were in their apartments. And, it was a different policy landscape that it was very much like young people had to earn their housing. So, it wasn't something that people were just entitled to. And this was in the adult system too back then. This was early 2000s, 2004, 2003. And, so youth were only eligible for the housing program if they were employed and or going to school. And so what ends up happening is sort of a sorting of the young people who get access to housing were often the young people that were already on a path towards stability because they had, their school, their employment figured out. They just needed that housing unit. And then the young people who were really struggling on the street with maybe their behavioral health, processing trauma, they weren't able to access housing or shelter or employment. They were just kind of left out of access to the system. And so there's been shifts over time over the last 20 years.
Has it just shifted back?
I think we're in a very pivotal time right now. And we're kind of like straddling that edge of, is housing first working? Does it work? And
didn't the Fed just take that off the table anyway? Aren't there now more requirements being put on people to get housing?
Yeah, I think there's definitely more rhetoric around it. But the reality is that the evidence supports having low barrier access to services. And so, whatever that looks like for different populations, for young people, who are adolescents and they're really developing in terms of, oftentimes when they come to be with us in their apartment, it's the first time ever that they've been in a non-congregate setting. They've maybe never slept in a room by themselves before. And so what do the supports need to look like there? Might be a little different than like adults who've, had different housing opportunities in their lives and they know what it looks like to have an apartment or sign a lease or be responsible for your own space. So, I think that there's definitely an attitude shift amongst certain policymakers as to whether housing is something that should be a basic human right, which is what we believe here at Together, or something that you have to prove that you deserve or earn. And so I think that's always kind of been there. We had an acceleration in policy, I think, from 2008 till now that really said like, no, wait, like people need, before they can even work on their behavioral health, their substance abuse, their employment, their physical health, before they can deal with any of that, they have to first have basic stability and safety. And so that's still the framework we operate with here at Together because that's what actually works for young people.
Yeah. And you guys you solved the problem internally within the organization. You have a couple of apartment complexes, I believe, right? That you get vouchers for?
Yeah. So the apartments, the way that they are built and structured, each unit has a voucher that is subsidizing the rent and subsidizing actually the building operation.
Are you guys providing the vouchers or is that coming from Housing and Human Services?
So that's coming from the state housing department, which actually flows from the federal government. So it's a HUD. People used to refer to it as a Section 8 voucher. It's called the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And that's really critical to our model, especially for young people, because one, when they get into their housing unit, there's that guaranteed affordability. So they're not going to pay more than 30% of their monthly income toward rent. And so that really helps to provide that security and safety. A lot of young people, they have a lot of success finding jobs, especially that first job. But it's a lot of work to keep and maintain that employment. And so you don't want to have this panic of like, I was working at this food retail shop here on Pearl Street. I lost my job or I quit because I wasn't getting along with my manager. And now, oh my gosh, now my housing's at risk because my paycheck. And so there's a little bit of an ability to absorb some of that. And then the way the vouchers work is that after a young person, and this is true for all supportive housing in Colorado or most supportive housing that's newly built with this model having vouchers. They're called project-based vouchers.
Okay.
And so in the adult population, this is true as well. Like Bluebird here in Boulder, which is our adult PSH project. During different times in the funding cycle, at the state level, the vouchers can be made into tenant-based vouchers. And so the young people can actually, it's called port their vouchers, but after they lived at the property a year, if they want to move out and they maybe don't need the same level of support that they needed when they first moved in, but they still really need that affordability, then they can take their voucher and find a private landlord in the community that is willing to accept the rental subsidy, and they can move out and have that independence. And then, more importantly, we can have another young person move in.
So another voucher comes back into that.
Right.
Okay.
Which is why there's only certain times, like the state will say, okay, now we have the budget to authorize folks to move out because they need to know that they can backfill that.
Are you guys worried about losing funding for the vouchers?
Well, not right now. I mean, there's a contract that's a 30-year commitment of the vouchers to the property. And then through this recent negotiations with the budget bill in Congress, there was a lot of worry that that budget would be cut severely, but it so far has seemed that there was not going to be huge cuts to the Section 8 or Housing Choice Voucher program.
But probably not a lot of construction of these projects right now.
I certainly don't think we'll see more.
Yeah.
But I think what we have and what we're really focused on is maintaining what we have, and how do we look for opportunities to potentially grow from a place of stability.
You guys had a recent setback a little bit with your youth shelter shutting down. What was the cause of that, and how has that affected your ability to provide services?
Yeah, I mean, that has been really impactful and really difficult for young people and our staff and our team here. The Source is our youth shelter here in Boulder, and it provided really a lifeline to young people, not just the overnight shelter for youth who are unhoused, but also drop-in and day services for youth who are in the community and they wanted to have a safe place to go to have a meal, meet with a staff member, case manager, take a shower, have basic supplies. And what happened with the Source was together, I've been here now almost 2 years as a CEO. And when I stepped in, there was some significant funding gaps, especially for our emergency shelter. And so we were looking at about $500,000 a year deficit operating that program. And it is hard, I think, for folks to understand emergency shelter. It's 24/7, 365 days a year. Because we serve minors at that facility, you have very strict licensing and staffing standards. So whether we had 14, 15 youth or one youth, we had to have the same staffing model. And so I started to talk with local funders about how do we address some of this funding gap. And we were working on having those conversations. It was a really difficult time because local government funding is also constricting right now. I think people don't necessarily see that a lot of funding to local governments flows from the federal level. So we were pushing forward having those conversations. And then we had an unexpected funding cut that was around $500,000 that we just weren't able to absorb and continue operating. And so we did have to pause our operations at the shelter. And now we're really working hard to stand back up our street outreach and drop-in services for youth. So even if we can't yet provide those overnight beds, again, we can still be that lifeline for youth in the community.
What happens to the kids? What do they do if the shelter's not there?
Well, there's several different options. All of them are, it's challenging to be an unhoused youth in the community, even when there is a shelter bed. But what we are really seeing with our street outreach team is that young people who are 18 or over, they can go to the adult shelter All Roads here. And so we're working with our partners at All Roads to talk through, can we have a dedicated referral relationship? So if we have a young person who our outreach team finds on the street, we know they're vulnerable, they need a bed that night. How do we make sure that All Roads can hold a bed for them? And then our staff could help them get to the shelter, help them get settled for the night, integrated into that environment. Because, what we hear a lot is, and I have been going out with the outreach team once a month, which is a favorite part of my job, getting to actually see and talk to young people. And they don't want to go to the adult shelter because, that 18 to 24-year-old, even though they're technically adults, legally, they want to feel safe. They want to have relationship with folks who really understand what young people are navigating. And so we're working to set up some of those relationship and referral pieces. There are providers in the region that have beds for minors, so under 18. There are pretty consistently open beds for under 18. So it's a matter of how can our team help navigate them.
They're not locally though, are they?
Not in Boulder County, in Loveland and in Denver. So
you're transporting people to these shelters? Or?
Yeah, we're working on how do we set up those supports when we restart our outreach efforts. And so it is patchwork. What we're trying to also figure out, and we're hoping to hold some listening sessions with youth and with the community of is there another model that we could use our building, the source for, like a shared housing model for youth. There are some nationally, some dorm style arrangements for young people. And so what does that look like? What's the funding model needed? What's the appetite from our local community funders to actually get behind us so we can, reopen that space again for youth?
Are there a lot of kids on the street right now?
Well, yes, there are too many. Our shelter was 14 beds, and we were definitely almost always full in the winter, and then between 10 and 14 overnight beds year round. So, we know there's a gap in this community now, and we really want to rally the community to step up and fill that gap.
Why do you think the gap is in Boulder's a very affluent place? You wouldn't think that we'd be lacking these types of services. You have any ideas on why?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I have thought of that a lot, in terms of there is this gap in Boulder where you have, some of this really extreme wealth and affluence and progressive minded folks. And then we have this, unsheltered homelessness problem, which is very common in high cost housing markets, right? I think sometimes don't always tie together, as the cost of housing goes up, people experiencing homelessness are also going to increase. And for youth, I think sometimes it's really making folks aware that young people are in our community and these services are needed, because young people, they can often be I heard a youth, they refer to themselves sometimes as chameleons. So especially in a community like Boulder, where it's a university town, seeing a young person walking around with a backpack at the library, on the bus, isn't necessarily going to set off any sort of flag of oh, I wonder if this person's unhoused, the way that sometimes in the adult homeless population, where you have encampments and big concentration of folks or people who have really navigated maybe decades of unsheltered homelessness. And, you can see that it's really taking its toll. With young people, they blend in more. And there's also, I'm sure you've heard of the expression couch surfing. So, young people are more able to potentially find a place to stay. It's not always safe for them. There's a lot of exploitation that happens with youth in exchange for shelter and a place to stay. But it's not as, I think, visibly present in the community as adult homelessness. And so part of our work, I think, over this next year, now that we have had to make this really difficult decision to close the shelter, is to say, young people are here together is in relationship with young people. I mean, that's a huge piece of our core values is that we always say growth is rooted in relationship, and just a young person who sees one of our staff with their Together t-shirt on outreach, or, if we are able to have a partnership with the shelter and we have staff over there that are Together staff, youth know like, okay, this is a safe person. And this is a person who actually knows about young people, who looks like me, talks like me, understands part of what I'm navigating. And so that piece, especially for youth, is really important, that relationship piece. And we have young people who come back. And last year we had someone who left a note. I think Alex posted it on our Instagram, who just said, I just want you to know I'm doing great and thank you for the services and support together. So
That's amazing.
yeah. And I think that's important to have this footprint here.
Well, you needed.
Boulder.
You obviously needed it. So thank you for being here. So you guys don't just do housing though. You have a bunch of different support programs or wraparound services, I guess, as they're called.
Yeah.
So you kind of help with everything in a young person's life. Is that accurate? From ADLs, helping people with their checkbook, and like if they even use a checkbook anymore.
Venmo,
yeah. Helping them.
Yeah. Cash apps. Yeah.
Helping them consolidate their cash in one app. But can you tell me a little bit more about your programs?
Yeah. We operate, our 2 housing programs, but we also have, as I said, this emergency services piece. So sometimes,
what does that look like?
Well, we're reimagining it now because of the closure of the shelter, but we're hoping by October we can reopen our street outreach and drop in. And that can sometimes be just working with a young person for a couple days. So we often see young people who are passing through town and they're trying to figure out how do they get to their next safe place. Sometimes, especially for the under 18 population, it might be a young person who's living at home with guardians, auntie, uncle, grandparents, and they've had sort of a blow up at home. And so they're not able to be there. But if our team is able to have that young person come meet with us, tell us what's going on, we can reach out to family members and say like, hey, can we support potentially this young person coming back home? What does that have to look like?
So mediation of
I mean, I think it would generally fall under the category of case management. I think the official term is reunification. Or sometimes it's like, well, it's not working for this young person to stay at dad's, but auntie's willing to take them. And so we might help make those phone calls, facilitate those conversations. So that can often be a really positive outcome for a young person. It's not necessarily that all young people need to go directly into a housing unit. We also currently operate a behavioral health treatment program for adolescents, and that's here in Boulder too. And that's really on the spectrum of youth who are in foster care, or they're Medicaid covered young people that need to have some behavioral health treatment that takes place outside of the home. So residential treatment and placement. And
is there a philosophy that you guys follow?
Yeah, it's a pretty specific form of treatment. So young people, they need to have been assessed that they need this level of treatment. It's not just, oh, I'm having trouble with my kid. Can you take them for, a few weeks? We have a full-time clinical director and a clinician at that program who, works with each of the young people and family. So it's, every day the young people are either in groups or individual therapy. We do family therapy. So that's our most clinical model.
Is that here in Boulder or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here in Boulder. And it's not uncommon for a young person when they do age out of the foster care system and they're with us at Chase House that they would then transition into our permanent supportive housing. And they already have that relationship with Together. Or we've had youth who stay at Chase House. They've been at Chase House when they were younger. And so they know about Together. And then when they become adults and they're navigating housing instability, they're like, oh, I remember Together. And I'm going to go back there and find out information about their current programs. But that is a big piece. The case management is huge. So you said activities of daily living. I mean, for someone who hasn't maybe used a stove before or had an apartment, grocery shop, like how do you what do you need in your apartment if you have a $25 a week grocery budget? How do you use that?
I know how poorly I did when I was 19
Yeah,
at
me
it.
too. I mean, I think that's the other thing about adolescence is like everyone remembers their first apartment, or first living situation with roommates, or first time trying to make your paycheck stretch.
I was appalled by how much money I had to spend on food.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you really like, how do you navigate that? Like, you have other people in your life who are like, well, this is what I do, or here's something you could think about. Here's a resource. Here's a food bank that you could go to once a week. So we do a lot of that. And then we also do have clinical staff. So we have therapists that works at our housing programs, because what we see with young people is oftentimes when they're unhoused, they're really just surviving and day to day, trying to figure out, where am I going to sleep tonight? How do I get what I need in terms of, food, water, place to stay? And they're not really able to deal with some of the trauma that they've navigated in their lives.
Are all kids able to access your services, or is there a process that people have to go through? I'm sure there's some sort of process.
Yeah,
but
I mean, it's a pretty light intake process, and that's another piece of like when we bring back drop-in services, then we're able to meet with young people, assess them, and intake them into our services, so we know like what are they navigating, what do they need. But yeah, it's important that we have the behavioral health services on site too, because when young people do get housed and they have that stability, oftentimes there's a period of just rest. We'll see youth just sleep for the first few weeks. Sometimes we might not see a lot of them when they first get their apartment. But then as they get stability, as they start to trust, this is my home, it's not going to get taken away from me. Because I hear that a lot when youth, when they move in, they're like, it feels like there's a catch here, like, is something going to happen? Then some of that trauma comes up, and really like, how do you navigate it? How do you deal with it? And to have therapists on site that you can just come down and start to develop a relationship with. It's not like the first day the therapist is like, do you want to come meet with me? And like, let's have a therapy session. But there might be, like our therapist over at our apartments, she's been doing coffee and donuts in the morning, and putting them out, and like young people are coming down and they know it's there. And then that's a point of engagement.
How do you
and
catch a young person?
conversation. Yeah. Yeah.
Donuts
Or
and
like,
coffee.
yeah, the laundry, in our apartments in Denver, the case management offices are close to the laundry room. It's like everyone's got to go do laundry, and they might need detergent or supplies. And so that's a good point of engagement. And then over
Strategic
time,
positioning, huh?
Yeah.
That's good.
And so over time, developing that relationship where you then can start therapy and really supporting young people to navigate.
Seems like that was kind of what Housing First was supposed to be, right? You get people in and let them chill out for a minute, and then kind of get them in the wraparound services and help them move forward.
Yeah.
I think the vouchers used to come with wraparound service funding that got kind of chipped away at over the years.
Yeah, I think that's a persistent challenge, especially when you look at there's not enough, but there is funding for capital to build new housing, new affordable housing. And, when you talk about regular, quote unquote, affordable housing, it's a three-legged stool where you need capital funds, operating funds, and, property management, and like all of that has to come together. But with supportive housing, it's a four-legged stool where you have like the property management, operating, capital to build it, and then you need the services, and that's ongoing. And so I think that's been something some states have done a better job of establishing, like pooled funds for the services piece. But it's hard. That's an ongoing, that's one of our biggest fundraising goals here. And one of our biggest fundraising needs is, how do we fund our services?
Do you guys do a lot of private fundraising? Do you get?
Mm-hmm. We do. Yeah.
What is the structure of that? Do you have a big event, or is it just an ongoing process?
It's more ongoing, engagement at the individual and corporate level. And we have longtime supporters. Events are tricky, I think, for organizations that maybe have been around for 100 years and do a big gala every year.
You guys are close.
Yeah, that's true. 60. We've changed over the years, though. Do we do, in terms of our events? And typically, I think what people who attend events don't necessarily see is that, there's a lot of money that goes into putting on an event, such that oftentimes, I've heard for every $1 that you make in an event, 50 cents of it is going toward the costs of the event and staff time.
It's kind of a silly
versus
use of money.
Versus could you spend that time cultivating corporate relationships, individual? And so, ideally you would do both. And so we're trying to really find our rhythm there of, we have this really robust fundraising team. We have a lot of really strong longtime supporters, some corporate partnerships. And then what does an event look like that feels like us? I think with youth, sometimes doing an event that isn't connected to them at all has not felt aligned. Like doing a casino night or an Old West auction or something doesn't really have relevancy to the young people and what they're,
Together rave, I guess, huh?
Yeah, I think, there are a lot of inspiring youth serving agencies out there that have really cool events that I think resonate. Our youth, my favorite event that we've done was an art exhibition, because youth here, art is such a huge medium for them, whether it's spoken word poetry, anime, physical, art, murals. And so they really loved being a part of putting that on and bringing the community in to see some of their art. And we had so many people be like, "Can we buy this art?" And we were like, "We weren't really planning for it to be, like that." So
start up some businesses at the same time.
Yeah. I think we do have a lot of artists, writers are big in our community.
Well, this is the right place for that. What are the next steps? I know you guys are getting, hopefully, the source back up and running.
Yeah, I think that will be a process. I think we're really going to have to engage community and get them behind us. How we're thinking about it is that we're going to take this next year to really do a lot of work at the community level to understand what's needed, what's feasible, how can we reopen this in a way that's sustainable? Because the last thing I want to do is reopen it with a year's worth of funding and then not have an ability to keep running it after that. So I really want to make sure we have that sustainable model. So yeah, I hope to reopen some sort of overnight care for youth that's not permanent housing, because not every person needs permanent housing.
Is that the biggest goal you guys have coming up? Is to get that?
That's a big goal.
Yeah, it's a huge goal.
Yeah, huge goal. I think to keep our engagement and quality of services high for youth in our housing. I think that's, as you were alluding to, that's what really makes the biggest difference, is how do you have those services and that engagement with the people in your housing? Because if you have, the expression is housing first is not housing only. So I think, and it takes a lot of work and effort to be in relationship with young people. It's not just oh, well, we're down in the lobby, so come down and see us, especially for young people that haven't had a lot of positive adult relationships, So I think quality of services, stabilizing here at Together so we can do the work that we're best at, which is, building those relationships with young people, connecting them to permanent housing, and helping them to eventually move on from that into a more stable environment.
There's a lot of hubbub in Boulder about the visibility of homelessness, and it seems like there's two camps. People that want to. No one likes homelessness. They're in that camp, but people that just want to have it taken care of, and then people that want to take care of it, I guess. And you guys are taking care of it. Is there anything that the community can do to show you support because you guys are actually taking care of it? What could the community do to help you? I know fundraising is probably the most important, but is there anything else that the community could do to get behind you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that funding piece is important. So a lot of times doing what I do, I get asked like, well, I have this young person in my life and they want like some money, they're not housed and they want some money and should I just give it to them? And thinking about like, can you support organizations in the community that are already equipped and ready to work with young people and get them transitioned quickly out of homelessness? So the funding piece is big. I think there's an awareness piece. So like I was saying, you know, we all know and see the encampments in the areas of the city where there's a big unsheltered adult population. And oftentimes there are young people that are sprinkled within those encampments. And that's another important piece to get our outreach back out there again, because they know, where young people are. And even adults who are unsheltered will tell our team like, hey, we saw this young person hanging out here. Like there may be an intent with this person. I don't think it's totally safe. And so that piece is big. Just awareness of like there are youth in this community who are experiencing homelessness. And then from a policy level, like, we do have an active community that likes to reach out to their city council members, that likes to reach out to the county commissioners. And I think understanding that, local government, especially now with the federal government pulling back from a more aggressive approach to solving homelessness, it's going to really rely on local city and county, state governments. So, how are they making sure, they're not just saying, I don't want these people in my neighborhood anymore, but they're understanding like, well, what directly is the solution? Is there, a new housing, tax that we could run, or is there a new funding source that would really significantly change the landscape? And how do we get that done? So I think that's a big piece too.
Yeah, it's kind of looking like we might have more people on the street here by the end of 2026 if all this stuff gets cut like they say they're going to cut. Are you guys able to handle?
Yeah, I mean, I think like we're able to grow as funding is available for us to grow. I think that, we're always open to innovative models. So, thinking about like I was saying with the source, can we try something that's been tested in another community for youth that maybe we could open up like dorm style housing or something like that. So how do we adapt to what we're seeing? And that we talk to young people all the time. So sometimes that's how we learn like, hey, things are changing. Like it's harder for us. We can't get access to the rec center anymore. And so we don't have a place to take a shower. Like, and then how do we respond and kind of help create some of that infrastructure in the community? So that's one piece is just like being on the ground and listening. Um, but, as homelessness increases, it's going to impact young people too. I think Boulder in this community, we've increased the number of supportive housing units significantly in the last few years. And so we've actually done a pretty good job. There's just a city just did an updated strategic plan around addressing homelessness. And the data was actually showing that we were having less people come in or like holding steady, even with higher numbers of homelessness, less people, needing the shelter every year. So it's like, I mean, we're still full, but some cities you see, they might house 200 people a month and 1,000 people become homeless. And I think that's where there's really an important tipping point is like, no matter how good you are at rehousing people, if you have more people flowing in, then you're able to stabilize and get out, then you're going to have that explosion of unsheltered homelessness. And that's what we're seeing in Boulder and many communities, especially in the West where housing costs are quite high.
Right. Yeah, I think twice now you've mentioned dorm style housing. Are there places using that model currently?
That's another thing that's sort of ebbed and flowed with different policy changes. So, in the early days of when we started to see homelessness kind of come to fruition in the 80s and even early 90s, there were single room occupancy, dorm style. This is more in the adult system, but where people might pay $10 a week or a really low cost to have a bed. And that can often help with the folks that are falling into homelessness. They might be working or, they would otherwise be able to remain housed, but they just don't have access to an affordable unit. And so in the youth space, there's been different models of that nationally. And so it's really understanding like, are there youth that are working and able to pay even a modest amount? And is there a market for that? Is there a service model for that? Has it been tested and proven? So I don't have a model that I'm like, this is for sure. But I do want to spend some time talking with other cities and communities and youth providers regionally and across the country of like, we have this opportunity, we have this building, we know there's need, we have even some funding to renovate it, but like, let's not just reinvent what we did if we know that wasn't a sustainable model financially. Is there something else out there that we haven't looked into or tried?
Were you thinking of doing this at the source at that building?
Potentially. I mean, we don't have any, we're very early and we just closed it in May. So we're still kind of reeling from that and trying to restabilize. But
If you would do dorm style, would that increase your capacity?
not necessarily, because the shelter was a dorm style. So we had, a female identifying dorm and a male identifying dorm. And but it would potentially, capture a population that maybe we weren't serving before, or it could, our funding source previously at the shelter had limitations on like 3 weeks and it was 21 days that you could stay. And that sometimes isn't helpful if you're trying to like get accepted into Job Corps, like go to school and you need a stable place to be, but then you're kicked out at sort of an arbitrary timeline. So I think I just want to take some time to be generative and expansive of like, let's not just do what we've always done because we didn't take the time to look at other options. I think right now in this funding environment, we have to be creative and we have to really look at what's out there that we haven't tried that could potentially work.
So it might be an opportunity to build something even better than you had before.
It might be. Yeah.
Hopefully.
You have to hold on to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that hope.
Well, there's not a lot of options for people to get rooms. People have been doing these interviews and people talk about how you used to be able to get a hotel room and now you need a credit card and a deposit and people can't get into hotels very easily any longer. No youth hostel here in Boulder any longer. So there's really no options for people. And with the way the policies have kind of pushed the authorities to treat people, no one's getting any sleep any longer, and it's we're not solving the problem. I think you guys are on the right track to. You're solving the problem, at least for the youth. If we could get this model kind of pushed over to the adults, I think Boulder would be a much happier and safer place, probably.
Yeah. Well, I think with young people, you do have that opportunity to really change the trajectory of someone's life, that we see in our permanent supportive housing, even though it's not time limited, which is really very critical to the model because young people aren't on a schedule. So, back when I was starting my career, a lot of the housing programs were 24 months. They were transitional. And so I was like, well, you get 24 months. And if you have a relapse in month 23, good luck. I mean, you're done. And so we now have the ability to keep youth longer or shorter, depending on what they need. But we see an average of 2 years is how long they're here with us in housing. And so, it really is that springboard for them to, stabilize, go to school, get, a lot of young people are doing like their CNA certification, other things while they're with us. And then when they're ready to move on, they do. They're like the Nest 56 project in Denver. We did some focus groups with the young people because I was like, can we please call it something other than our address, which is what we have here. And they chose the name Nest because they really like the idea that like it is a safe place for you to be and to grow, but it's also a place you eventually leave. Um, and so, that's not as much a component in the adult permanent housing. It's like a lot of times once they're young or older adults are housed, that's where they live for the rest of their lives. And that's critically important as well. But, for us, it's like we really do have the opportunity to potentially, change that trajectory and have young people not experience homelessness again after their time with us.
2 years isn't really that long to deal with. I'm sure that a lot of the kids have a lot of trauma coming into this program, and to be able to get stabilized and work through that and be gainfully employed in 2 years is pretty remarkable, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that long, but sometimes you don't need that long. And it's not as though they're leaving here and everything's resolved. They're still navigating a lot of complicated factors in their lives. And like I mentioned, that voucher
I'm
piece.
still doing that too.
I know. So are we all, right? I mentioned that voucher piece, so if they have that affordability, the idea is that then they have the tools, right? They're like, oh, I've seen this before. Or we start to see young people after they've been with us in housing for a while, they start to know what their triggers are. So, an anniversary, for example, of, a sobriety anniversary. So a young person said, last year I really struggled on my sober anniversary, and I know it's a really hard time for me. And so this year I'm working with my case manager. I'm kind of thinking about what can I do to kind of prepare for that day coming? What support do I need so that I don't have, um, a crisis during that time where I'm get really depressed and I'm not able to go to work and do things. And so I think it's about building those tools. We talk a lot about resiliency, and young people, that's not a word that resonates with them because
Resiliency?
yeah, because resilient, I think they've heard that phrase their whole lives in such a way that it was like, oh, well, you just have to be resilient, and
Pull yourself up
really,
by your
yeah. And
bootlaces.
if you can't make it, it's just maybe you weren't resilient enough, and it puts all this onus on the individual rather than the systems that weren't set up for them to begin with. But they do like the phrase talking about, how did I overcome my challenges, and how do I have tools to deal with that, and how do I talk about my experiences in a way where I'm really the author of my own story and not just these are all the things that happened to me. So yeah, we talk about that. So we changed our language. We used to talk about wildly celebrating resilience, and now we say we celebrate youth as they grow. Because that growth
And the kids
piece,
taught you that.
yeah, they were like, "Can you please not call us resilient anymore?
That's amazing.
We're over that."
Yeah. You guys, I'm sure every 5 years there's a whole new language and a whole new.
Oh yeah, yeah. They are all very, they're very therapized, and they're like, "This is," I just love the way that young people talk about their expectations in an environment that it is trauma informed, that it is, I had a young person talk to me about something that happened at the shelter, and they were like, the way that staff person talked to me was not trauma informed, and this is my home and I deserve to feel safe. And it's such a level of ownership, and they know that they deserve that.
Cranking out advocates.
Yeah, and they're not gonna be okay with anything different. And so I love seeing that. And I think in the adult population, that kind of gets beaten out of you over decades and decades on the street. And so the more we can cultivate that and have the young people out in the world. And we also have some peer leaders on our staff, one here, and then we're hiring for one in Denver now. And that's huge because, young people seeing another young person who's on our staff who has navigated some of the same experiences, who can say hey, I was where you were, and this is some of what I did to, find treatment, or I started talking to the therapist and I started working on this or that, or like I've had similar dynamics with my mom, and so that's a really big piece. And I think, a lot of times I hear youth say things like, I love my case manager and I love the Together staff, but like they're all getting paid to be here with me. And so like, and they don't really know what my life has been like. And then when you have a peer who's like, no, I know. I mean, they're also a part of our team, but they um, just have that like relational piece that sometimes staff, there's not that trust there yet.
Well, yeah, people can uh, know if you relate or not. And I'm sure it's pretty easy to spot someone that doesn't know what you've been
Yeah.
through.
Yeah. But part of the work is like someone doesn't have to have had the same experiences to show up for you.
That is true.
And like building that trust that like, young people that we work with haven't had adults that show up for them by and large. And so continuing to do that, even when a young person is, we have a lot of conversations about like what's okay and what's not okay in terms of the way that you talk to staff or you come down in the lobby and you're yelling and you're mad and you're throwing things. And it's like, well, that's not okay, but we're not done with you just because you acted that way. Like we're still here. We're going to check back with you and we're going to, keep trying to engage with you in a way that is safe and, feels safe to you too.
What would you want young people to know? Any idea of what you'd want to convey to them?
I mean, I think, this is something that I think is said in the field a lot, but it is very true, especially for youth who I think sometimes, and all, we've all been young people, you can sometimes over identify with an experience that you're having. And, you know, being unhoused, navigating homelessness is an experience that you're having right now. And there are people in this community that can support you. And it's not who you are and it's not who you will be. And, just to know that I think when we see young people come in and engage with our services, it's like, oh, you're an artist, like you're um, a student, you're a sister, you're a mom, like that's who you are. It's not you're a homeless person. And so I think, many of the young people we work with have experienced homelessness throughout their childhood. And so helping to like reframe that, like you are a whole person. And we see all the different parts of you.
Helping people reclaim their identity.
Yeah. And that there's value there. And just, I was just talking to a young person this morning who had their nails done and was like, like very artistic and expressive. And it's like, yeah, this is who you are. Like you always have some flair. So just seeing them, I think.
Great. Well, thank you so much for doing what you're doing. And it's an incredible operation. I hope the community realizes that we need more of what you're doing. We really do. Everywhere, not just here, but I think Boulder is pretty good compared to a lot of other places.
Yeah. I mean, I think prior to coming together, I worked nationally with cities and states and counties all over the country. And I think every place has their things that they're good at and ways that they support and safety nets and things that they're lacking in. So I think Boulder's similar. Like we have ways that we really excel as a community to support folks in ways that we have some work to do.
It's probably going to be the same.
Same, yeah.
Everywhere.
Yeah, I used to get that question a lot in former roles. Like, well, what city is just like hitting it out of the park and getting it right? And I'm like, look around. Like, it's an issue everywhere. Although I will say, you see places with lower cost housing and they don't have the homelessness issue. Like, it's often cited West Virginia, who have some of the highest levels of substance use and people struggling with recovery in the country and the lowest level of homelessness because their housing costs are low. And so we have to keep reiterating that homelessness is a housing affordability problem, full stop.
Yeah.
And that, yes, it is very intersectional with substance use, behavioral health challenges, the criminal justice system. It intersects all those systems. foster care, as you said, but like at the end of the day, if people can't afford a place to live, that's going to be the first time they're sliding into homelessness.
Yep. We got a lot of work to do still.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great. It was great chatting with you.
And thank you guys, and I'll see you next time.